Hi, this is Roger Himes, the Gospel Coach, and this is Gospel Coaching Session number 2. Now, the purpose of these 5 or 6 minute coaching sessions is to give you one major gospel truth to think about. And today we're going to talk about our thoughts versus God's gospel truth. Now, first of all, fighting the enemy of our thoughts. A life maxim says our life is what our thoughts make it. Another says today we're a delayed reaction of what we thought about yesterday. God says the same thing. He says that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Now it's hard for us to fight an enemy if he's inside our head. This is because what's inside of us is part of us, and we don't consider what's inside of us to be an enemy. But most of us are filled with unfounded opinions on the theology of man. This is really all theology is. It's man's opinion and ideas about God. And religion is how we enforce those ideas that man has. The gospel is so much different. The gospel is God's testimony and statement of his kingdom reality. And it's what we Christians must believe. You see, that's why we're called believers. We believe what God says. Now let's talk about the Supreme Court for a minute. Supreme Court of the United States. As you know, I'm a lawyer. And I was reading a case about Christian beliefs being protected by our Constitution. The Supreme Court said that most Christians that testified did not have true beliefs that could be protected by the Constitution of the United States. The Supreme Court said that most Christians just had opinions and preferences. They didn't have true beliefs. They said that most Christians could change beliefs about as fast as they could change a pair of socks if somebody gave them reason to do so. Now, the court also referred to the Bible. It said that if beliefs weren't founded on something substantial and dependable, like the Bible, then they weren't true beliefs. They were only opinions and preferences, and they could not be supported by the Constitution of the United States. The court called them hip pockets of philosophy. Now, to be a true belief, to be protected by the Constitution, the Supreme Court said that beliefs must be based on something substantial, and we must teach them to our children. We must also be willing to confront teachers that don't teach them to our children, and even remove our kids from schools if those schools refuse to abide by our beliefs. Now, the court said we must be willing to share our beliefs with others without reservation, without hesitation. We must be willing to want to change the world to also adopt our beliefs because they're so important to us. And lastly, the court said we must be willing to face prison and even physical death for our beliefs. Now, friend, this is the Supreme Court speaking, not some preacher from a podium. Now, Paul talks about fathers of the gospel versus instructors in Christ. This is in 1 Corinthians 4:15. And he says there's 10,000 instructors compared to very few fathers of the gospel. Now, instructors tell you what to do. They might say, go try ABC this week, and then if that doesn't work, come back next week and I'll give you XYZ to go try. You know, this is really the philosophy of man that the Supreme Court was talking about. The gospel shows us how to relate to God, how to live in a peak state, and how to get the most leverage out of life. It shows us how to be undergirded with the power and the presence of God himself. And it shows us how to experience the abundant life of Jesus. Most people only dabble in Christianity. It's like they don't really take it seriously. And they don't think the gospel is the gift of God to us, like it really is. They treat it more like a Sunday sport. We don't like being told what to believe. You know, I said this last time. We like to be able to choose what to believe. We don't want someone telling us what to believe, not even God. So we create our own beliefs, and this isn't really smart. You know, even Jesus says, if I come in my Father's name, you don't receive me. But if somebody else comes in his own name, him you will receive. You know, it's like we have the second Tower of Babel today. There's so much divergent thought, opinion, and theology, it's like the second Tower of Babel. This is what the Supreme Court was getting at, I think. Yet Paul says we should all say the same thing. We hear so much non-gospel preaching today that if we hear the true gospel, it often sounds like scriptural error to us. After all, we're children. We're spiritual children, and children live what they learn. Jesus says that the words he speaks to us, which are the gospel, are spirit and life. If we continue in these coaching sessions, and if you really see the gospel for what it is, it will impart the Spirit of God to you, the Spirit of life. Every single area of your life will change. The gospel is the belief the Supreme Court was talking about, although it didn't really use the word gospel. Philosophy often produces failure. The gospel is what causes us to be successful and to live life in God. Hey, thanks a lot for listening. I'm Roger Himes, the Gospel Coach.